Hi everyone, today I want to talk to you about how to create the introduction paragraph. And the whole purpose for having an introduction paragraph, and most of us know, it's supposed to introduce our topic and our thesis statement, but what's really crucial is that it has to have four main parts. And the four parts that we have are the attention getting, or the hook, the development of the theme, the link to the novel, and the thesis statement. If you look at these last two, we've already done these. We've already filled them in our essay outline, so we don't need to focus in on them. What we do need to focus in are on these two ideas, which is that whole idea of that attention getter, that hook, that development of the theme. That's what we want to talk about how to create today. So how do we create it is that whole idea. The first things that we can do is to think about the introduction as an upside-down paragraph. In other words, this upside-down triangle is really a good way of looking at the introduction. It has four main components. Once again, the upside-down triangle, if you look at it, it's going to start off very general. So that would be the hook. Then it's going to have the development of the theme, and that's going to narrow in a little bit. Then it's going to have the link to the novel. That's where we get more specific. And then we're going to have our complex thesis statement, and that is the ultimate point we're making. And so that's the reason for the upside-down triangle. We go from broad, that general, all the way down to our specific point that we are making. So keeping that visual in mind will really help. So let's focus in and ask ourselves, so what's the purpose of an attention getter and the hook? Well, the purpose is obviously it's going to be the very first sentence in our introductory paragraph, but we want to get the reader's attention. We want to make them want to read more. Think about it. Especially when you're writing an essay, teachers read a lot of them. People look at a lot of newspaper articles. What makes them decide that they want to read yours? It's how we get their attention. But also a crucial point is that it's a very general introduction to the topic. And so sometimes that can be a hard idea to come up with because we think, wait, we're supposed to be writing about a literary novel and you're saying to get really general about it? How do you do that? Well, a way for us to look and focus in is thinking about beginning with something like a startling story. We set the scene, a particular scene. We use a description, but we definitely avoid the questions. So one thing that I would say to focus on would be these two ideas right here. Let's use that startling story, that setting of the scene to help us really focus in and decide what it is that we want to say. Let's help ourselves out and talk about what does it mean to develop the theme. Well, when we develop the theme, we're going to first start off by asking ourselves, what lesson do the readers take away by the end of this literary work? What was the whole purpose of it? So I'm going to think about Warriors Don't Cry, and I'm going to ask myself, why would Melba want to share this story? Why would I need to know about those particular events? Well, I thought it was important because we're faced with adversity, and even though she had all of those challenges, she still overcame them. So if you look at it, it really elaborates on the theme and it helps me develop my paper's purpose. Once I figure out, well, Melba faced adversity, now I know I'm going to have to somehow, in my hook, talk about the theme of adversity. That's what I'm going to use. So that's the first step. We want to create a hook. We ask ourselves, what's the overall purpose? What is the theme? My next step, if you take a look at this, is coming up with an example of a hook. So when I say the theme, well, I'm thinking about adversity, and I'm beginning to think most general. I want to go general with it. Forget Melba. Let's make it even more general. What is it that people learn? Well, look at my example here. People often say they've sacrificed when they feel they have given up something. But sacrifice doesn't necessarily mean loss. So I open up with this general statement, with this anecdote, and then I develop the theme. This is that whole idea of developing it. Sacrifice can also mean delaying something in order to gain something greater than what one gives up. Adversity is facing great challenge and sacrificing many things, not just for the benefit of oneself, but for the benefit of the many. So let's just think about this for a second in terms of what I'm doing. The whole hook was really kind of focusing in on this whole idea of what lessons are readers taking away. Well, I was talking about how Melba suffered through loss, that's adversity, and I was making a general statement about how people feel like they suffer loss. Oh, I got a bad grade on the test, or oh, I didn't get this particular present that I really wanted for my birthday. But that's not really what loss is. That's not suffering. And I'm thinking about Melba and how she really suffered in the book. doing in this particular situation is I'm coming up with that startling story, or I'm setting the scene through that theme. That's really what I was doing. Coming back to this, another way of thinking about it is to really think about, rather than that, I'm going to actually use the memoirs that we are signing out from the library. And when I'm trying to think about a startling story, I can't help to think about Wes Moore and the novel that I had shown everyone in class, which was titled Discovering Wes Moore. Now, Wes Moore was an average teenager, and here this man talks about how he had good parents, but then his father dies suddenly, and because the family doesn't have money, his mother has to move them into a poorer section of the town. And once Wes moves, he ends up getting in trouble, involved in watching with gangs and drugs and violence. And his mother, in an effort to rectify the situation, sends him off to military school. And as we talked in class, Wes discovers that if he hadn't gone to military school, if he had stayed in that area and continued on the path of being part of those gangs and getting involved with drugs and getting involved with crime, he would have probably been imprisoned. So that's a pretty startling story, and I think to myself, wow, I'm going to use that introduction and my grabber. So look what I'm doing instead. My hook is going to say something along the lines of Wes Moore. He watched his life fall apart. Now my reader is thinking, well, who's Wes Moore and what happened to him? And now I'm going to develop the theme. I'm going to talk about how after his father dies, his mother has no choice but to move the family to a poorer section of his Baltimore town. In his new home, Wes meets adversity through gangs, violence, and poor choices. In order to rectify his behavior, his mother sends him to a military school, and 10 years later, he discovers what would have become of him had she not intervened. So that would be an example of how I develop a hook. The hook, most students think, is one sentence, but really the hook is a combination of not only that first sentence, but that development of the theme. The two come together, and I end up with 3 to 4 sentences that really become the hook in my essay. Talk about a hook or attention getter. Again, it is the very first sentence, but notice how I put the S in parentheses, and it makes you want to read. And now what I have to do when we think about, well, what's the next step? Now go back and link it to the novel, and that's the whole purpose for the chain links here. This is where I'm going to now link in what does Wes Moore have to do with Melba, and this is going to help me narrow my topic from general to specific. So that would be one. So again, we talked about in class making sure we have a complex thesis statement. This should be set. I've already looked at these on Google Docs. And again, it has to be the last sentence of the introductory paragraph. And when I put it all together, here's an example of what an introductory paragraph would look like. And I'm saying paragraph because I'm pointing out in green down here at the bottom. I'm adding my link and my thesis statement. So if we read this all together, we have my hook and development of theme. Think of it as one big hook pull into the particular essay. And then I have my link and thesis. And watch how I go from general down to the specific. So people often say they have sacrificed when they feel they have given up something. But sacrifice does not necessarily mean loss. Sacrifice can also mean delaying something in order to gain something greater than what one gives up. Adversity is facing a great challenge and sacrificing many things, not just for the benefit of oneself, but for the benefit of many. In 1957, the Little Rock Nine faced great adversity as African Americans who integrate an all-white school for the better of society. In the memoir Warriors Don't Cry by Melba Pattillo Beals, Melba shares her experience as one of those 9 students. And then here is my thesis and how I end on my point. Although Melba believes integration will be an easy task, she rapidly matures when she experiences adversity and racism. So notice again how I go from that general all the way down to that specific in the last line. So following these steps, you should be able to create a hook for your introductory paragraph. And then once we combine that hook and development of thesis together, and we take it and apply it to what we have in our outline, we'll have an effective introduction.